Imagine living in a country where a foreign company controls your job, your home, your food, your transportation, and even your government. That was reality for many people living in Central America during the late 1800s and early 1900s. These countries became known as banana republics. A banana republic was a country where powerful American fruit corporations had more influence than the actual government. Companies like the United Fruit Company used money, political influence, and even violence to control entire nations. The people who suffered the most were the workers and farmers who were trapped in a system built on greed and exploitation. At the beginning of the 20th century, many Central American countries were struggling economically. They had valuable lands and natural resources, but they lacked the money and infrastructure to modernize. That's when American Fruit Company stepped in. The United Fruit Company, led by businessmen Andrew Preston and Reiner Keith, promoted railroads, roads, and ports in countries like Honduras, Guatemala, and Costa Rica. But there was a catch. In exchange, these companies demanded huge amounts of tax-free land and long-term control over railroads and shipping routes. Governments agreed because they desperately needed the investment. Over time, these corporations gained control over transportation, ports, and trade throughout the region. Most people living in these countries were farmers, but once fruit corporations owned the railroads and shipping ports, they could charge extremely high prices to transport crops. Small farmers just couldn't compete. As a result, fruit companies dominated the entire fruit market while paying almost no taxes. They became richer and more powerful while ordinary people remained poor, and the companies were willing to do almost anything to keep that power. In 1911, Honduran President Miguel Zavia attempted to tax fruit companies because the country was drowning in debt. One company, Quaimo Fruit, responded by helping organize a rebellion against the government. Its leader, Sam Zamuri, funded mercenaries and supported former President Manuel Bonilla, who eventually replaced Davila. Once Bonilla took power, he restored the company's tax breaks. This showed just how much influence these corporations had. They were not just businesses anymore, they were shaping governments. The fruit companies also created company towns. These were towns where everything was owned by the corporation. The houses, schools, stores, police, and utilities. Workers were often paid in company-issued currency instead of real money. That meant workers could only buy products from company stores and could not easily leave or pay off debts outside the town. Management jobs usually went to white Americans, while indigenous and Afro-Korean workers were forced into dangerous manual labor. People hated the power these corporations had, so much they nicknamed them El Puplo, which means the octopus, because their control reached into every part of their lives. To maintain control, fruit companies bribed politicians, crushed labor unions, and outlawed strikes. But workers still resisted. In 1928, over 25,000 workers in Colombia went on strike against the United Fruit Company, in what became known as the Banana Massacre. The workers demanded basic rights, a 6-day work week, medical care, and payment in real national currency instead of company money. United Fruit refused to negotiate. Fearing American intervention, the Colombian government sent troops to stop the strike. Soldiers opened fire on crowds of workers, killing hundreds, possibly thousands. The government killed its own citizens to protect the interests of a foreign corporation. As these corporations expanded, the United States government became more and more involved in Latin America. Presidents like Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft believed that the U.S. had the right to intervene in other countries in order to protect American business interests. Between 1898 and 1934, the U.S. military intervened repeatedly in other countries like Nicaragua, Haiti, Honduras, and the Dominican Republic during conflicts known as the Banana Wars. Even the Marine General Smedley Butler later admitted that the military was often helping corporations rather than defending democracy. One of the biggest examples happened in Guatemala in 1954. President Jacobo Arbenz attempted to take unused land from the United Fruit Company and return it to the Guatemalan people. United Fruit responded by claiming Arbenz was secretly connected to communism. During the Cold War, that accusation carried enormous weight. Powerful American officials, including Secretary of State John Dulles and CIA Director Allen Dulles, had close ties to United Fruit. The CIA then launched Operation PB Success, training and supporting forces that overthrew Arbenz. The new government returned the land to the United Fruit, but Guatemala soon fell into decades of violence and civil war.